Paul's view on slavery, a deeper understanding of freedom and salvation. Welcome back. Today we're addressing a question that often sparks controversy and confusion. Did Paul condone slavery in his writings? Was he silent on the issue? Or did he quietly accept it? It's a challenging question that many have asked, and it's essential to understand the context and reasoning behind Paul's approach. The simple truth is this: Paul did not support slavery, and neither does God. But there's more to his stance than meets the eye. Paul's decision to focus on salvation over social reform carries a profound message for us today. Let's take a closer look at Paul's approach and how it illuminates the power of salvation in transforming hearts and society. Salvation, the true path to change. Imagine living in a time when slavery was deeply ingrained in society. People were born into it, forced into it, and it seemed an immovable institution. Paul, however, faced a critical choice. Should he prioritize social reform by attacking slavery head-on, or should he focus on spreading the message of salvation? Paul chose the latter. Why? Because he knew the power of the gospel to change hearts. When a person comes to Christ, their whole perspective on life shifts. A slave owner who encounters Christ will no longer see slaves as property. They will see them as brothers and sisters. Salvation, in Paul's view, was the most effective way to bring about true freedom. Imagine this scenario: a slave trader who repents and embraces Christ. Through their newfound faith, they would transform from someone who exploits others to someone who treats others with the dignity they deserve. Paul wasn't overlooking the injustice of slavery. He was addressing it at its root, where true transformation begins, in the heart. The story of Onesimus, a living example of change. One of the most powerful illustrations of Paul's stance on slavery is the story of Philemon and Onesimus. This small book of the Bible packs a punch when it comes to understanding Paul's message of freedom in Christ. Onesimus was a slave who had run away from his master, Philemon. During his time in Rome, Onesimus met Paul and became a Christian. Paul, in turn, considered him his spiritual son. But Paul's message to Philemon was revolutionary. No longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you, both as a fellow man and as a brother in the Lord. Philemon 1:16. Paul didn't merely tell Philemon to forgive Onesimus, he urged him to treat him as family. In a world where slaves were seen as property, this was a radical message. Paul showed that the gospel doesn't just offer salvation for the soul, it also redefines relationships. When we come to Christ, our social and personal connections are transformed. The larger picture: how God limits the consequences of injustice. God's approach to societal issues like slavery is not to endorse the system, but to bring healing through salvation. While Paul didn't directly dismantle slavery in his letters, he focused on salvation because he knew that when hearts are changed, systemic injustice begins to crumble. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul addresses slaves and masters, encouraging slaves to respect their masters. But Paul's reasoning wasn't to justify the institution of slavery. It was to prevent the gospel from being misrepresented. Paul understood that the true change would come when those in positions of power encountered Christ and saw others as equals. By focusing on salvation, Paul wasn't ignoring the institution of slavery. He was placing the emphasis where it would have the most lasting effect, on the heart. If slave owners were saved, they would no longer treat people as property. They would treat them with love and respect, as brothers and sisters in Christ. Freedom in Christ, a transformative message. Here's the key message: God's priority is always salvation. Why? Because salvation isn't just about escaping eternal punishment, it's about changing lives here and now. In 1 Corinthians 7:21-22, Paul emphasizes that spiritual freedom supersedes earthly conditions. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you, although if you can gain your freedom, do so. For the one who was a slave when called to faith in the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Similarly, the one who was free when called is Christ's slave. In this passage, Paul highlights that true freedom comes from being a servant of Christ. Whether you're a slave or free in Christ, you are free. And that freedom is not only spiritual, it transforms how we interact with the world. A saved person, whether a slave or a master, becomes an agent of change who treats others with respect, dignity, and love. A lesson for today: changing hearts to change society. Although we no longer live in a society with legalized slavery, the lessons from Paul's approach to this issue are timeless. Today, we still encounter systems of injustice, exploitation, and oppression, whether it's poverty, racism, or inequality. As Christians, we must ask ourselves, what's the most effective way to bring change? Paul's approach teaches us that true transformation begins in the heart. Social reform is important, but the most effective way to address injustice is through the gospel. When hearts are changed by Christ, the way we treat others changes. And that shift in attitudes can ripple outward, creating change in families, communities, and even entire societies. Conclusion. The ultimate freedom comes through Christ. In conclusion, the Bible and God do not condone slavery. Paul's writings reveal that while he didn't directly confront the social institution of slavery, his focus was on salvation, because that's where the real, lasting change begins. The gospel is the ultimate liberator. It frees us from sin and compels us to set others free from injustice. If you want to change the world, start with the heart. When a person's heart is transformed by Christ, they will treat others as equals, and that's how true freedom spreads. So as we reflect on Paul's teachings, let's remember this. True freedom comes through Christ, and through him we can bring freedom to others. In our next session, we'll dive into another topic and explore what the Bible has to say. Until then, stay blessed.